Hey, everybody. It's time for another edition of Rant Wade with me, Wade McElwain. So you're all surprised. How come you're making podcasts that nobody listens to? Well, perseverance, really. Lack of work. Lots of things that go on to that. And, of course, the glasses, you're not going to see them in the podcast. But once again, I'm wearing my rose-colored glasses because I'm a bit of a dyspeptic cunt. And I sort of want to be able to positivity, right? Positivity, he says, as he sips his national drink of Canada. A refreshing glass of ginger ale and a chunk of ice cube that just went down my throat. So, what are we going to talk about in episode 6? Holy crap. I get my posture right, too. And I got a shadow behind me. The lighting, everything's going Pete Tong. It's all wrong. But I'm going to fix that. I tried to do a green screen last time. A few people saw that. Anyone watching the video on YouTube, people that are just listening will be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, man. I have no idea. So I'm going to talk about Canada in this episode. My home and native land. As many of you can tell from listening to the accent, you're not Canadian. I am. I haven't lived in Canada, though, for 18 years. Numerous reasons, work and stuff like that. But I wanted to talk because a lot of people always talking. They've got preconceived notions about my country, and I just thought I wanted to discuss some of them because it's not as great. I love Canada. I love Canadians. That's what I love. It's my family, my peeps, my people. Canada, the government itself, not so good. The country, lovely, beautiful. Weather, sometimes horrible, a lot of horrible. But the people who run it, good gosh, golly, god darn it, not so good, not so good. So let me tell you, let's go through and talk about, because a lot of times too, I've lived in the UK, and I'm an immigrant, as you can tell. I don't sound like regular Canadians when I go back. It's like, oh, you sound different. But I'm an immigrant. Sorry, got the coughs going. Already started coughing the podcast. Get rid of that. So as an immigrant, I know what it's like because Canada, we've just done this big thing in Canada under the Prime Minister Trudeau, whose dad was Prime Minister. He has no real training for the job other than his dad was Prime Minister. He did teach canoeing at a camp. So that'll teach you for running a country. So Canada has embarked on letting a little over 1 million immigrants come in a year. Hey, look, I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, immigrants stealing the jobs. Nothing like that. Hey, of course not. It's great. Immigration's great. We need immigration because population is getting older around the country, around the world. You've got certain countries, they're going to find themselves in deficits when it comes to labor. So immigration is very good. Also, look, there's some bad crap going on in the world, mostly caused by our economies and by our businesses and by the fact that we treat people like crap. So a lot of them are like, hey, my world's collapsed because your country put up factories here and it poisoned all our water. It's like, oh, I guess you can move in. So look, now immigration is good. We need immigration. But there's come to a point in Canada where now there's too much immigration. In fact, a recent study has just found that 2/3 of Canadians believe that we need to just stop the immigration. Stop, not get rid of them. And the reason is, look, the Trudeau government went balls nuts on trying to get as many immigrants as possible. The policy, while it was originally vetted to go after what they consider the brains, the big brains, the people that are in technology and people like that, what eventually happened was that you found that one of the ways the governments and universities found to make money, colleges particularly, was through education. And so you have places like Conestoga College, which I know quite well, accepted a whole bunch of people, but particularly from one country. And I'm not going to single out the one country because it's not very fair, but we've had one country that's been dominating the immigration. And that's made things really uncomfortable because when I was back in Canada about a year ago, and obviously I was taking an Uber, which is French for Uber, and I was talking to my drivers who, of course, are immigrants like me. And they like the fact that I'm like, ooh, I don't live here anymore. So they're quite open to talking to me. And all of them said, too many immigrants here, too many immigrants. Why is that a problem? Well, there's lots of problems. Why? One of the main problems is when it comes down to housing and healthcare. Okay, which are things that Canada wants to help out with. When you have a lot of immigrants that come in, you would think, okay, well, we're going to open up our immigration policy. We want to let 1 million people in. If your plan is to let 1 million people come into a country What's your plan where they're going to live? What's your plan in how they're going to get jobs? What's your plan in how they're going to access healthcare? What's your plan in spreading out across the country so that certain cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver aren't inundated with so many immigrants? You don't have a plan. And that's part of the problem, is that you would have a lot of these people, a lot of these immigrant families that would come, and it's like, hey, welcome to Canada, come on in. By the way, do you have a place to live? And so the goal was that Canada, in sort of this myopic sense, thought, okay, well, we need people, we need immigrants to help our population getting older. Great. Let's get the smart ones. Great. How do we get it, and how do we go about doing it? I mean, you also have populations that sort of gear towards certain areas. Particularly the Chinese population, the Hong Kong population, very big in Vancouver, and to a point that while there were governments like Quebec allowing people in, saying, hey, come on in, stay in the province, you just got to speak French and stay here, they all left and went to Vancouver. And of course, British Columbia, which has Vancouver, is like, hey, what's going on? So there hasn't been a very good job in Canada in terms of dealing with where the immigrants go and particularly spreading them around. As you say, when most people go to Toronto, or Tirana, as they call it, 416, Drake. Yeah, I don't know. Is that gang stuff? Most people go to Toronto, and so Toronto is already, as Ernest Hemingway once described it, a fistulated asshole. Not my words, his, but I just said it, but it was his words. And what he found was that Toronto is just very uptight. Montreal's a fun city. So you got all these people going to Banker Wanker Town of Toronto, and Vancouver, and then you also have places where there's rural communities in places in like Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba that are like, hey, we could use some people. We've got some homes here that are empty. Hey, if you like to build homes, come, we'll give you land for cheap. Yeah. So does that work? Not always. So the problem is then the immigrants are now moving to those areas. Now the government has now said, well, what we're going to do is try to spread them around. We're going to try to spread them around. Like manure, I guess, is what they're thinking people are. You got to have a real plan with that when you're going to do it. The ginger ale into it. The other problem that they're having too with immigration, you may not know, about 25%, now even more than that, people who immigrate to Canada leave within the first year to go to the USA. Because they come in there like, what? How? This expensive here. Why is it so expensive? And I can buy a house in Detroit for $30,000? What the wawa? So a lot of Americans are just like, oh, hey, please stop sending us all your immigrants. And also you have immigration smugglers, the worst people in the world, the people that are, smuggling people carriers. And you have them, a lot of them, getting people to cross the American border in January when it's like minus 40, and then they die. Because it's horrible. So, people are like, why are you down on Canada? What are you down on Canada like this for? I just want people to know what it's like, because the one of the things that you may not understand about Canada is that Canada has one of the highest rates of unionization in the world. About 30% of people in Canada are unionized. It's great if you're in a union. We had a lot of manufacturing, and unionization has been strong in Canada based on the social networking, I guess social systems that we've had in place in the past. Difference between America. Unions have always sort of had a strong balance in Canada. And why is that a problem for you, Joe listener? Why is that a problem for you? Well, think about it. If 30% of the people are on unionized wages, if you're a small business, and I've seen it with a lot of my friends' small businesses, you set up a small business, and a local union comes in and goes, yeah, I need to unionize in here. It's like, I can barely afford to pay staff, and now you want me to give them dental? You want me to give them all these other things? I can't afford that. And so there's a pressure on that. It also takes away, when you have heavy unionization, it takes away from innovation. It really does, because there's not, when you're making a good living and you're being paid well and you're being paid and taken care of, there's not any degree of need, because manufacturing is manufacturing. There's no degree of innovation. Now, of course, we've seen innovation get bought up. It used to be in the past that companies would spend 60 to 70% of their budget on innovation, because that's what they needed to stay ahead. Now what companies do, like the big companies, is they wait for someone to innovate, then they buy them up. So innovation is a big thing. It's also small, as I said, the small businesses, restaurants, everyone else struggles when you have such high rates of unionization. But also the big thing is also when when you're an immigrant coming into the company. Wow, interesting to say that. Freud, I've got your slip. When you have that coming into the country, they're going to be like, well, how do I get into a union? Hell, hold on there, fella. You get multiple years before you get into a union. And I mean, you've got unionization. So I mean, the one thing you may not recognize in my province of Ontario, the liquor stores, because you only buy beer, you can only buy liquor from a liquor store, beer from a beer store. They're starting to change that. People are like, what? But they were unionized. Now, when I was there, people, it was a great job if you get it, because it was like $35 an hour back then, to just work and sell alcohol, and you would just like polish the bottles, like my friend said. You just polish the bottles and put them there. He was stoned half the time at work. I'm like, I could do that job. Stoned at work, and I just like polish bottles. That's what I do at home anyway. So these unionized jobs that sort of happen, you're like, do we really need that to be unionized? What unionization does is it increases the cost of living. It makes it a cost because you've got certain people making a certain amount of money. The teachers in Canada, as you may or not know, the largest company in Canada is the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. A pension fund? Largest company in the country? Yeah, that's a bit crazy, isn't it? The pension fund that basically we could just buy assets. Now, when I first moved to the UK, the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund owned part of BAE Systems. They make things like missiles and guns and weapons. British Tobacco, which makes tobacco, and Camelot, which is lotteries. So I was like, okay, so the teachers, these ethical teachers in Ontario, own weapons, gambling, and cigarettes. And you're like, okay, that's sort of it's a bit ripe. So when you have these kind of companies, and man, it just makes it very difficult for anyone to get ahead when you have that. So let's keep going on with this Canada thing. I'm ranting. This is it. This is Rant Wade. I got the glasses on, so I'm supposed to be happy. All right. So you got anti-competition, which makes things very difficult. So how does anti-competition, and this again is going to affect the way that you buy things in Canada. Original thing that we had in Canada, they all teach us in school. They don't teach us about the native killings and how we treated our indigenous like crap. Even though I put my hand up and I sent it out of the hall, it's like, pretty sure what we did was genocide. Yeah, can we say that? A Holocaust of some sort. Can't use that word. Yeah. Going off in a rant, I was talking about how we treat our natives and competition. Oh my gosh, that's what I was going off. Competition. Okay. So because of the lack of competition in Canada makes things more expensive. So say you wanted to get internet, telephone, anything like that. There are two companies. There's Bell and Rogers. And guess what? They work together. That's right. They trade things all around. It's like, we're different, but we're not. Collusion, I guess you would call it. Canada has the highest cell rates and television rates in the world. Now, the companies are going to say, it's because the country's so big. Yeah, that's not true. They like to throw a lot of those things in there. The other thing you'll find is, and the problem is, the Combat Investigations Act. Sorry, that's what I was getting. Knew I was going to come back around. Damn you, marijuana, for getting in my brain many years ago. I don't do it now. Combat Investigation Act basically was a way that the Canadians, we were taught in school, that there was an act passed to protect Canadianisms or Canadian companies and businesses from America. Obviously, we were worried about the predatory practices of America coming through, taking advantage of everything. And for a while, it worked. And what it does is it brings brand loyalty, because Canadians are very loyal. We will keep going to one place because it's Canadian. And that's what we do, like supporting Canadians. We're very good at that, which is why people go to Tim Hortons. And Tim Hortons is a coffee shop, very big one. It used to be Canadian-owned, named after a former player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then it was bought through Burger King, and then it's bought up through this Brazilian company. And it used to be that the donuts would be made at like 5 a.m. You go in there early. There's a guy frying the donuts, smoking cigarettes. It was just great. And it was lovely, right? Now, they're just like little turds, little like seagull poops, and they put it into a convection oven and heat it up. And it's like, here's your donut. It's not the same. You know what it's like to get a deep fried donut? Oh my God, rolling in that fresh sugar. So competition, as a result of which, what we've had is becomes lackadaisical. So when it comes down to food, you can only buy your groceries from several stores. And they're all pretty much owned by the same companies. And what they do is a company like Loblaws, named after a guy named Bob Loblaw, Robert Loblaw, but his name literally Bob Loblaw. Make your own jokes there. So Loblaws owns Zehrs, which was a regional stock market they bought Southern Ontario, and then they also own like No Frills and things like that. So they give the impression that there's lots of different choices, but there's none. And the food rates are absolutely astronomical. I'm not lying to you folks. Food prices in Canada are 3 times what I pay in the UK. 3 times. When I show people my grocery bills, they're like, come on, that's what you pay? It is what I pay. The costs are just so prohibitive, and you're like, how are groceries so crazy expensive in Canada? And like we make all the food there. It doesn't seem right. But it is. And that's just the way that Canada is. It's just there's no competition. Things get very expensive. And that also pushes forward into the restaurants. There is a term in economics called the Big Mac Index. And that's the idea that no matter what your currency, a Big Mac should be approximately the same amount in every country around the world. Now, I believe in the UK, a Big Mac meal here's around $5.99. I haven't been to McDonald's in a while, but I did walk by to see it. Now, when I was in Romania, it worked out that the meal was around $3.95. Again, I was just comparing it just for the purpose of this, not that knowing this. So when I was in Canada last time, there was a meal with a friend. It was $22.99. That's quite the difference, isn't it? Some sort of parity there when you're looking at it. It's almost 3 times the amount. So that brings up the question is, oh man, how are things so dang expensive? And the cost of living has pushed Canadians to the point that Canadians actually have the highest household debt threshold of any of the G7 countries. Basically, that means that the debt ratio that Canadians hold is the highest compared to what they have for their income, which then means that Canadians are more likely than anywhere else in the world to be about very close to like missing all their bills. So if they missed a payment or delayed in anything, would miss their bills. And that's really tough. You can see it in Canadians. You can see the cost of living really biting. I mean, in Britain, obviously, food prices change. We haven't seen them change for years, but they finally changed, and it was a really noticeable effect here. In Canada, it's been creasing up every year. And, of course, the grocery companies are just grocery stores like, that's not our fault. It's like, it is your fault. What did happen is other companies and the government said, look, we want other companies in here to create competition. What's happened before when that's happened is because there's such collusion amongst the industries is the 2 companies that Canada has goes, hey, they want to bring in a third. Let's shut that down. And so they work together to make it sure that those companies cannot get access to supplies, labor, because they build and buy so much. They put the pressure on there to say, you're not going to help these people. And that's just horrible. That's just horrible because greed. Let's talk about wealth then. That's another thing about Canada. I'll get into wealth. So Canada, one thing I've noticed about Canadians, in Britain, there's wealth here. Now, there's a lot of posh people who have no money, which is crazy because there's people I went to high school with, literally their families could buy castles here from these families that can't afford to keep them up anymore. But, the wealth divide is also big because of the cost of living, because of unionization, the cost of living index makes it much more difficult for people. There's more Canadians experiencing homelessness, but then, of course, you have other people buying second homes. You look at a teacher in Ontario where you're talking, that if a salary, say, on average is $100,000 a year for a teacher, and then they get 90% of that salary when they retire. You imagine that? Like, you get 90%. How many other jobs in the world do you think you can get where you're going to get 90% of your salary when you retire? You have to deal with a bunch of asshole kids. But that's part of the whole thing is you get paid for life here. And so when you have other people that are working laborers and you have someone who's maybe, working, say, retail, you got none of that. People who work in retail and who work in restaurants, literally the bottom of the food chain. So the wealth divide has made it so much so that everyone, if you're not pulling in good money, then you're going to have a real hard time. And unlike Britain, which has a very good social welfare state, I think Canada's one is deplorable. I haven't seen the way our social welfare state works, but I've seen it work here because you see it on the action. You see them dealing with homeless people. You see them dealing with issues You don't find that in Canada. It's not enough money. It's too much. And it's sad because Canadians are very compassionate, but the government and the way the system is set up is not to be. I mean, we have things in the UK here called ombudsman, which you wouldn't have there. So in the UK, obviously we have numerous energy companies and you can shop around for prices. You cannot do that in Canada. You can't just go around and go, yeah, I'd like to get a cheaper rate on my gas. It's like, you get one price. That's it. You buy it from the Ontario Power Generation, which also had some, Google it if you want, but literally, there at one point, they moved a power plant because of a political reason, which cost Canadians billions because of politics. Some person got butthurt because you're not putting it somewhere. So it cost billions. It's that kind of stuff that you have, and that wealth divide is also seen in the Indigenous communities too. Because how many Indigenous unions are there, you know? And while there's been a greater, I think, appreciation and attention to trying to help Indigenous issues, it's still not. I mean, you look at when Trudeau came to power and he was like, because a lot of the Indigenous communities have no water, no clean water, which is a fundamental human right, you know, place to live, human water. And the government had treated natives so poorly beforehand. A lot of the accommodation needs are rotting, falling apart, moldy. They built it in areas like, hey, we built you a community. It's like, why would you? We don't want to live there. No, but we built it for you. So there's a lot of just idiotsness that goes on with that. And that wealth divide you're going to find growing with the natives, particularly as, you know, they're struggling just basically to get the basic necessities of humanity together. And that's hard enough to go, oh, Jesus, now we can't get water. You know how much that affects your mental health and your physical health? Not being able to get clean water every day, access to clean food. This is a real failure in terms of a government, in terms of a country, that we would literally, you know, as I said earlier, the way that we treated our Indigenous peoples is just shocking. And the fact that we were sort of unrepentant about it while other countries were. It's like, well, we don't have a problem. The Catholic Church took care of it. And they do so much good stuff. Healthcare is also starting. Canada has used the method of British healthcare, applied it. But the problem is the waiting lists are absolutely ridiculous that we have. We don't have enough specialists because what happens is a lot of Canadians and a lot of people start working in the healthcare industry in Canada and go, wow, in America, they'll pay me twice as much. Zoinks, and they're gone. And with an aging population, that makes things difficult because there's a real responsibility of people to become, you know, like for the government to take care of this. And, you know, you can see why a lot of people don't want to become doctors anymore. People are assholes. The training is long and the burnout is high, and literally the government is so desperate for doctors, they throw them in to a system that's like, unless you're private, they're just going to like chew you all up. That makes it very difficult for people. It makes it very difficult. And you find a lot of this healthcare dynamic in the rural areas as well. My nose is getting itchy from my special glasses. In rural areas, we have, because, you know, you go to certain communities in the Maritimes and the prairies, you need a doctor, you know, and no one in Estevan wants to have to drive to Winnipeg all the time. And so being able to, in the rural communities across New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, having access just to a doctor there. Now, again, that comes down to another problem that we have in Canada is, in a lot of countries that do this, I would say Britain maybe a little bit better, is the accessibility of foreign healthcare professionals being transitioned into an applicable role. Because as we know, as immigrants, the countries, you might think that you're immigrating to a place because you want a better future. Think about it this way, though. Countries are looking at you going, what can you do for us? It's not about your opportunities. And you'll find that out quickly when you're an immigrant. You come to a country, it's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing for us? What are you going to do for us? Yeah, you get a lot of that. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. I got to dance for you. So that's a problem when you have a lot of it come in. A lot of these people are like, oh, okay, all right. So it's tough, and then you can't get healthcare. The other problem, I didn't even mention this about, and I was talking to an immigrant about this. An Uber driver, again, he's like, look, I drove Uber, Canadians suck at driving. He said, but the problem is when you first come here, one, they make it so difficult on immigrants when you first come here. Insurance and driving tests, they're like, yeah, no. Oh, you haven't driven in Canada before. We're going to have to pay the highest rate. Oh, you don't have a license. You're going to have to wait for this. You have to do this and pay the highest rate. So we really, once we get the people there, once we get the immigrants there, we just fleece them and screw them. Fleecing and screwing. Oh, I've seen that movie on Pornhub. Don't fleece and screw people. Man, I'm just trying. It's a land of contrasts, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, and I mentioned about Trudeau. I knew him a little bit growing up, bit of an idiot. And as a result of his tenure, our standing, it used to be that Canadians were known as peacekeepers. We would stand up. When we spoke, the world listened. And now it's just like, oh, shut up, Canada. It's just such a whiner. And as a result of which, world leaders have sort of looked at us. I mean, when you look at some of the way that he's dealt with some of the countries and said certain things, it's like, please don't do that. The fact that we've had the tiff with India, that we allowed them to basically just kill our citizens, you know. And I'm sure CSIS, which is our Secret Service, has probably known a bunch of this, but I'm sure it was him not getting involved. You know, he might seem like he's just the most welcoming, great guy in the world. And it's just, what if he's just an idiot who's just trumpeting what everyone else says? What if he's just an echo chamber of farts in a liberal conch shell? I don't know. But what I'm saying is he hasn't done well for the country. And he's gone. He's going to be gone. So it's going to be interesting to see what Canada will do after that. Another thing, Canadians, scams. All right, so scamming. When I was back in Canada, the amount of scams, like the phone would just ring daily, all the time. Hey, you want your ducks clean? And I like to do hate crimes. Not in a real hate crime. Almost on the edge of one where you just say something like, I don't think you can say that. Oh, I sure did. Or porny. I just get really porny with them. Get your big cock in your hand. Let's stroke together. Let's do it. Let's come at once. Let's make birthday cake. That kind of stuff. But a lot of scams. And I think I probably cut a lot of them down for my parents just by doing that. Food-wise, Canada, oh man, we're going to issue with Canada. I said before, we have all this land and agriculture, but food's so damn expensive. The fact that I can buy a loaf of bread here for 35p, which in Canada that's what 65 cents, and it's like $2 there. Even a fresh loaf of baguette, steaming hot baguette like this, it's like £1.25 here. So it's not right. It's not right, Canada. And like anywhere, there's always a posh ruling class that rules everything. It's in Canada, you don't really see it. Because like, oh, we're all equal. Then you forget it's like, oh no, there's those billionaire families. And they don't, like in England, they don't, like, you don't see them in their castles. You do see them, you're like, oh, whose cottage is that? That's got an airplane on it. So the wealth divide is getting worse. And, you know, we don't have things like charity shops in Canada. There's no giving back. There's no way for people to make money and give back to the community. So those are things that bother me on Canada. I love the country. I love it. And I hope that things change, but it's going to be very difficult to change Canada just by the things I've just talked to you about. The things I've ranted on for half an hour. If you do want to move to Canada, I go ahead and do it. They're full right now. But yeah, you might as well go. It's a great place to visit. In the fall, this time of year, it's fall right now. Autumn, as they say. Perfect time. It's like 27 degrees Celsius. The lakes are still warm. And the kids are in school. So you can go and enjoy Canada and have fun. All right. Last section of this podcast. I call this one The End Is Nigh. And I know I'm wearing the pink glasses. Cannot be a negative Nelly in terms of this, but there's some negative things that I want to talk about. And things that I think that end is nigh, things that I think I can see sort of ending that we really need to focus and work on because these disappearing are going to be bad for all of us. One of the first things that I've seen disappear in my lifetime, which isn't good, is the middle class. Now, the middle class is a group economically between rich and poor. Now, that's usually people you can move, but it was also something that people want to attain to. If you're poor, being middle class was great. And middle class was something we saw particularly dominantly in the 50s and 60s in a post-war economy where people were starting to get wealth and you could buy a house. It is a bad sign of our society that a person on any income cannot afford a place to live and a place to eat. If the government can't do that, you failed. You failed as a government. If you cannot provide that basics for people, you're a failure. And we're seeing that more and more governments that are failures. So the fact that the middle class has declined and is eroding is something we really need to be worried about. Because having a healthy and robust middle class is not only good for the economy, it's good for mental health, it's good for culture and people. And we also need to break down this wealth divide. The fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer and the middle class is declining is bad. To that, one of the things we're also getting rid of, which is bad, is cash. Why is cash bad? Well, because when you do digital transactions, the banks can lie and lie. With cash, it's really hard to. Banks want to have more control over you, the economy, everything. And so switching to a cashless society in terms of digital economy is something, and a lot of people, it's easy. I would never use my phone because I know people that work in technology who are like, never use Apple Pay. If you use Apple Pay, you're going to get stolen from. Also, just tapping on your phone, it gets so easy to steal money. And, when I was doing comedy, I get paid in cash. It was gold. And the reason is for that, and you notice it, the power goes out, or stuff goes down, or there's a banking app failure, which we have in the UK a lot. We only take cash. We're only taking cash. So moving away from a cash society, and particularly you have a lot of elderly people who only use cash, it's really discriminate to do that against them, because it's like, okay, well, we're just going to make it tough for you people. Again, a sign of a bad government, the fact that we're moving away from having cash, and it's going to be decentralized. Something's going to happen. We've already decentralized this to a digital economy. We'll see what happens next. Other thing I see that's ending that's really sad are information and facts. People don't really care about facts anymore. It's all about talking as loud as you can and bellowing someone down until you basically just beat them down with your stupidity. I've talked about just how social media is so pornographic these days, but the fact that there's no really room for discourse. When I was younger particularly, I'd break into groups and just be able to sit and have a rousing discussion with people. And it was always great because before the internet, you'd say, oh, I don't know that. I don't know. It was a big thing. Instead of going, blah, 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 and someone goes, you're totally wrong. You look like an idiot. Antibiotics are also something that we should be worried about. I'd read, essentially, I'm sure there's a scientist out there not listening, who, I think there was like 6 forms or 6 strands of major antibiotics that we have, classes of it. And apparently, when I was young, they were giving antibiotics away for acne. They're like, oh, good acne. You should get to try these antibiotics. I'm like, I don't think this is what they're for. We gooned through them in the 80s and 90s, partially in the 70s. And what's happened is we've pushed to the last one. Pretty much the biotics are done with our aunties. They want the uncles. I don't even know what that means. But what is happening is we're using them up, and when we run out of antibiotics, when you get sick and things get bad, man, it'll just rip through. If we've got nothing to stop them, antibiotics have been very good for us in stopping things. And the fact that we're just prescribing them like Flintstone vitamins, which I know don't need to be prescribed, and you probably can't buy them anymore, but we shouldn't be doing that. It comes down to the environment too. Look, obviously, fishing nets, it's bad. Holy crap, man! Why are you coughing so much, Coffee? Fishing nets in the ocean. Look, the polluting, we're killing so much. No one's taking responsibility, even though there's like 4 countries responsible for all these fishing nets. And the other point of it is water, too. Water, man, we got a whole planet of it, but nary a drop to drink. And which is silly because no one's really focusing on either trying to desalinate the water or also just trying to grab moisture from the air. There's times where you live in an area where the humidity is 80%. You're like, no one's ever thought of maybe grabbing some of this water that's soaking me up. It's there for free. I'm sure the technology's there, we just haven't. You have what they call Ogallala aquifer. That's right, I said it right, Ogallala. It's under the Midwest. And so what's happened is that's where all the water for the Midwest, it's an aquifer that pretty much keeps the water for a lot of the Midwest. Well, they've drained most of it. Colorado River has also been drained a lot for America. And a lot of the river systems have been polluted to getting down to the Gulf of Mexico, which means water's not good to drink. Now, you're not coming up to Canada to get it. But what happens is when you start running out of that water, just like the Dust Bowl, when you start getting rid of the topsoil, which again, we're getting rid of a lot of tons of topsoil, it's just going to be a dust bowl. The roots won't be able to take place. It's just going to blow and nothing will grow. And to the bees, Motrocos. I was going to say something rude and I tried to be clean with it, but I've already swore a few times. So, mother flocks. The bees. Look, if we lose the bees, we're done. You probably know this, but we're done. If nothing can be pollinated, we're done. No flowers grow. Nothing grows because the bees need to pollinate everything for us. Even though they're little assholes to some people, I love them. I love spiders better. But still, we kill the bees, we're in trouble. So we've got to get rid of a lot of the toxins we're putting in the air and a lot of crap that is just killing the bees. Bugs are also, they're part of the bees. 61% of the insect biomass is gone. 61% over the past 30 years. 61 of all the bugs. And what a lot of people and scientists are basically saying is that we're on our sort of sixth mass extinction right now in terms of bugs and in terms of a lot of animals. That the sort of mass extinction has begun, and that's not good for us. To that as well, oranges and bananas. I mean, I've talked about in the food episode, that we rely on so much of the same fruits and vegetables. Now, oranges, you probably know the orange crops in Florida have got a new fungus. There's always a new fungus going on. And so as a result of it, they're worried. Florida growers are worried, and the crops are going because it's like people are so reliant on orange juice, and it's just such an economy. We forget it's a fruit, and it's not something you can just manufacture, which we'd like to try. But as a result of which, the Florida orange growers are saying, look, if this fungus takes place, we're screwed. We're screwed. They don't say it in hushed tones either. Bananas as well. Bananas are also going through a mold process right now. The Cavendish banana that we're using has some problems, and we might not be able to use that as well. Plastics, we're putting plastics everywhere. We're all full of the microplastics. There's no way to get it out. And I'm pretty sure in our lifetime there'll be plastic healers. Oh my God, that's a good job. Why don't I do that now? Plastic healer. I just thought of it. I'll heal the plastic out of you. And you just like try to get their chakras and get the plastic out. I don't know if you could do that. But we got too much plastics. The rainforests are disappearing, which is not great. I'm wearing the rose-colored glasses, everyone. But I'm just talking about things that are disappearing so we can be really cognizant of these kind of things. Things you wouldn't expect it is for like fly ash. You know what fly ash is? Well, it's a byproduct of coal. And since we stopped burning coal, fly ash is actually used in concrete to keep it solid. Now, concrete, as you probably know, is disappearing. But it's not because in the same way concrete is going, and I'm going to talk about this, is again from fly ash. We need more fly ash. We're not doing coal. So concrete, as you probably know, has a shelf life. And one of the things that's going to start disappearing in our lifetime, we've started to see it, is infrastructure. Now, a lot of the bridges, roads, and things like that were built 40, 50 years, maybe more, sometimes 80 to 100 years ago. The concrete has started to degrade. And like we've seen in Florida a couple years ago when a condo just sort of collapsed from the sea air and the concrete, it just was weakened. We will start seeing bridges, roads just starting to collapse. And it's just going to be commonplace because no one's going to preemptively go, oh, we're going to go fix this concrete. Townships and countries and communities, they wait to see what happens. It's like, oh, we can't fix it right now. It's until something falls apart. So those are going to be problems that we also have with that. Housing, as I've talked about, the criminal justice system, it's only getting worse because the prisons are overfull. There's a lot of people really upset with the world right now, acting out. And so as a result, you get tension, you get anger. So, man, I could just keep going on about this. Common courtesy, that's going away. Being nice to people. I'm going to give you a little example. I'll tell you about this. I'm going to end it on this. So a couple weeks ago, I'm in my area in London, and I've always talked about killing with kindness and how you have to be cognizant of everything around you and people around you. Because you never know who's struggling. You could be having a bad day and you just want to punch people. Sometimes if you're having an okay day, think about people having a bad day. So I'm walking up towards me. There's a bridge over a little body of water. And I see an elderly lady, probably late 80s, struggling just to get up the hill. First thought, I just keep plowing by and go to my day. It's your first thought, but I'll just chuck that one down under. And it's like, you know what? I'm just going to. So I walk, I'm like, hello, gorgeous, can I offer you my arm? People are like, you're killing old lady, gorgeous. She loved it. Hello, gorgeous, can I offer you my arm? So I offer my arm. Can I walk you somewhere? Oh, yes, please. She's British, so I'm not going to do her accent. But we talked, and I walked her to her hairdresser, and we talked. And I made sure to slow down and think and appreciate everything. And do things in her level because sometimes I rush quickly. And just to be able to take the time to hold her arm, to walk slowly, to talk to her about her life. And she had lost her husband and her daughter all within a spate of a year. But also just to tap her brain. She's like, common courtesy has gone. People aren't nice to each other anymore. People shout. Technology's so fast. Why aren't people more community? And I think that's something, I talk about all the things disappearing. We can stop things disappearing by tapping into the elderly. I don't mean that in a sexual way. I mean tapping into them knowledge-wise, but also looking into how things used to be done. We're so quick to go on and ask GPT on how are things back in the 60s? Why aren't things as happy as they were? They weren't always great, but people had more of a sense of community. So I guess to that point, I walked her to her hairdressing appointment. And again, she told me all about her life and being alone. And it got me thinking again that it's like, you really just have to appreciate people. You really have to stop rushing around sometimes and just appreciate people, right? Sometimes you just have to appreciate people and their stories. Because it takes that communication. We're all in a hurry to rush by each other. We're all in a hurry to do things, but no one is in a hurry to slow down and appreciate people. And I hope you do that. I'm slowing down and appreciating you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening.